Now that we know how to save our models using both callback functions as well as promises, now we need to figure out how do we pull objects back from the database once they are saved to our database. If you go into our database, we'll see that we've got 5 records in here that have been saved through our tests. We've got our regular test, our A test, B test, C test, and D test. So we've got 5 documents in there. And what we're going to do right now is I'm going to go ahead and we're going to hide our create user test. I'm going to come up here. I'm going to comment the create user out because we don't really want that one being executed while we're working on our next set of tests. And in this one, we're going to figure out how to query or find documents in the database. So let's go ahead and let's do a new function that we can call from within our connection right here when we know that we're connected. We're going to do a function find all documents. Find all, actually not documents, right? We're dealing with user models. So although they are documents inside of Mongo, inside of our application, they're actually users. So we are going to find all users. So let's go ahead and add a call to find all users right here. We'll execute that function, and then we'll go ahead and come down here and focus right here on our find all users function that we're going to be working with right here. So find all users. Now find all users is actually a really easy thing to do using, of course, the user model, just like we did with saving. And we can do that simply by sending the request using the find function of our user model. So let's go ahead and document what we're doing here. So find all users, and we're going to do that using a callback to start out with. And all we're going to do is say user, which is our model, dot find, because that is the find function. And in Mongoose, we like to do finding using some sort of query on the attributes that are within our document. Well, when we would just want to get all documents back and we're not going to constrain it based on a particular field, like if we were trying to find all users with the name Bob, we would actually put that in here as our query. Well, we're not constraining it. We just want to pull back all of our users. So we just pass in an empty query object. And then because we are doing a callback, we're going to go ahead and use an anonymous arrow function that provides us an arrow and a result set. And this is where we are going to handle, oops, I forgot my arrow for my arrow function. This is where we're going to handle it. And again, we're going to do the exact same thing we did before. And if there is an error, we want to make sure we handle that. So we're going to do a return console.log, and then we are going to say error, and then we'll just pass that error so we can see it printed out in our console. Now, if there is no error, we want to look at the results. So let's do a console.log, and let's log the result set. And that should be all of our users, right? So instead of calling it results, let's go ahead and just call it users, because it's going to be all of our users. That way we're being more specific, more concise. All right. Being that we're all ready to go, we're calling that function right here. Looks like we've handled everything with our callback. We've handled the error case. We've printed out users if we get them back. Let's go ahead and run this in debug mode. And let's see what we get back. Oh, we need to go ahead and open up our terminal. Go to debug console. Here we are. We connected to the MongoDB. Oh, we didn't do a cool thing like we did down here where we said we were testing. So let's go ahead and do this up here. And here we are testing finding users. All right, this way we know what test we're actually running. Let's go ahead and refresh. All right, so initiating the Mongoose test, we are now connected to the MongoDB. We are running the test of finding users. And here is our array of models. And you can see we have an array that is chock full of 5 models. Of course, JavaScript arrays are 0 indexed, so we start at 0. But we should see in here we got test. We've got ourselves our test A. Awesome. So finding users works. Everything's going good. We didn't get an error because we've got a connection to the database. Perfect. Perfect. We have found all users. Well, we also want to know how to do that with promises, right? So let's go ahead and comment that out. And then let's go ahead and do a find all users using promises. And it's very similar to the code that we did down with the create user. But when we do a save, we actually get a promise back automatically from the save function. Now, queries, on the other hand, queries, when we are searching for items, they don't return promises by default. And this is where that exec function that I talked about earlier in the previous video when we were talking about save, this is where that exec function comes in handy. So instead of calling the query, the find query, instantly and then providing it with a callback function, we can gather a promise from that and then handle it like we did the create. And this is how we do it. Say let the find promise, so here's where we're capturing the promise, user.find, and we're going to do an empty query, and then we're going to call .exec on it. This .exec, so when we don't pass a handler right here, the user.find function identifies that we provided no handler function because that would be undefined. And when it does that, it says, okay, well, instead of executing the find query, it actually returns a query object. So it doesn't actually go to the database yet. It just holds a query object. Then when we call .execute or .exec on that query object that was returned by this, we then get a promise passed back to us while the database takes off, or while Mongoose takes off and tries to query the database, and then we get that promise. And then we can do like we did down before. We can actually test to make sure that this is a promise. So I'm going to go copy this code right here, and I'm going to come back up here, and we're going to say, okay, so let's verify that the find promise is actually a promise. And then we're going to go ahead and, let me go ahead and make this smaller so we can see more of our screen. There we go. Now I'm going to go ahead and we're going to handle the success case of our find promise by using the .then, and of course passing it an anonymous function, an anonymous arrow function that will then get the results back, because we know if it's hitting this, it was successful. So instead of result, we'll call it users. And then in here, we can just do a console.log, and we can log the users that we got back. And then again, we're just going to handle that error case just like we did down here. So I'm just going to copy this catch right here. And I'm just going to reuse it so I don't have to type it. So we'll put a .catch right there. All right, so now we should get our users back, and if we get an error, we should see that error in the console. So let's go ahead and restart. And we see that we got our arrows, we got our array of models back, and we can see test A is right at the front, or test at test, and then test A would be our second one right there. Yep, just like we have in the database. All right, so that is finding all of the users using a promise. Now, let's see how we might limit the results that we get back from a query. In other words, let's say that instead of just 5 objects or 5 models inside of our database, let's say we have 200,000 users. And when we have 200,000 users, we may not want to get all of them back. We may want to limit the number so we can kind of do paging. In other words, you guys have all been in a e-commerce website where you're looking at products, they don't show you all 200,000 products like on Amazon. Instead, you get to pick that you want to see 10, 20, or 50 products per page, and then you begin to see the pagination down at the bottom of the screen. And as you click on that pagination, you get the next set of 5 or the next set of 10. Well, we're going to learn how to do limiting in our database, which gets us prepared for implementing pagination in our applications. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take what we did here with a promise. I'm going to copy that code, and then I'm going to comment it out. And then just below it, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to do find all users and limit to 2. So I copied that right there. We're still going to use promises just because promises are awesome. And now we're going to add a limit to it. Now what makes it a little bit different than when we're just doing the query is that we want to add a limit to the query before we execute it and get the promise back. So that means we just need to add one more line here, and we say let users query, because we're querying for users, right, equal, and instead of this exec, we're going to cut this out, put it right here. So now we have this query captured, because remember above when we were talking about the promise, or when we were talking about this exec function, when this gets called, we get back a query, and it's on the query that we call this .exec, and that's how we get our promise back. So if we take this user query and we put it right here, this code right here is equivalent to this one line of code right here. We're just separating out the object that we get, the query object that we get back from right here. All right, but now that we have this query object, we can do some cool things by adding some more additions to our query, which means we can make our query a little more complex. And we can do that by saying users query dot limit, and this is where we are limiting the number of records that get returned to a specified number. So if you look down here in our last run, you see we've got 5 objects that came back, or 5 users. Well, now we've separated the query from the execution, and now we're making our query more complex by adding a limit to it, and we're limiting it to just 2 documents. So we should only get back 2 users when this gets logged. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save. We're going to rerun our program up, and you can see right here inside of our array we only got 2 objects back, so 2 documents, 2 users. We got test, and then we got a test, and we can see from our database right here we've got actually 5 objects in here, and we got the first 2. Now you can see how this sets you up for pagination. As you get more complex and you begin to do pagination, we then also have to add like an offset as well as the limit, so that we don't start always with the first 2 records when we're limiting. Instead, we offset by a certain number of records, and then we pull the next 2. Now, we'll learn about that when we implement pagination later on, but as of right now, it's really cool to see that we can limit the number of records that get returned. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and shrink this down a little bit. All right, so now we've found users and limited them. Now, I want to show you how we might sort the records that come back. This can be extremely helpful as well when you are doing searches on your data and you want to make sure that you pull back all of the records in a certain order. So let's go ahead and let's comment out our limit example, and we're going to copy that code, and we're now going to show how we might sort. So we're going to sort records. So I've got the same thing. I've got my query here, but instead of limiting, I am going to go ahead and use the keyword sort. So we're going to use the sort addition to our query and make it complex. Now inside of sort, this is where we identify the attribute field, so the field inside of the document or the documents that we actually want to sort on. Now a good one to sort on, if we look at our data here, is the email address, because we made it unique, and it looks like we go test A, B, C, D, so we could actually do sorting alphabetically on those. So we're going to go ahead and pass our email as the field we want to sort on. Now the cool thing here is that we pass in a flag. It's either a -1 or a 1. And that will indicate whether it comes back in alphabetical, so descending or ascending order. So let's see what a -1 does for us. Let's see if that's ascending or descending order. So we're going to go ahead and run this in debug mode. And then we're going to look at our, and remember we didn't limit, so we're getting back all of our users. And let's make this a little bit easier so we don't have to sit and expand our models all the time to see what's going on. In here for our successful one, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a map on our users. So let's do users.map. And then of course for each user in there, I want to go ahead and just print out the email address just so that we can see the order that the email addresses are in. So let's do a console.log and let's do user.email. All right, so we're just using the map function in JavaScript for users.map. And so for every object that's inside this array, we're going to pass that object into our anonymous arrow function, and then we're going to console.log that user's email. So let's go ahead and rerun this, and instead of a bunch of objects, we should just see emails. Aha, here we go. So we got test DCBA. So T is later in the alphabet than D, later than C, later than B, later than A. So it looks like we are in descending order or ascending order. Now I'm confused. Which is which? Ascending and descending. Here we are. So let's double check our knowledge, which is always a good thing. Descending order. Descending order. Numbers are said to be in descending order when they are arranged from the largest to the smallest. All right. So when we do alphabet in descending order, then we're going to get, so this is ascending because we're starting out with A, and then this would be descending order because we're starting with the ones that are later in the alphabet. So, all right, descending and ascending order. So we can order things, and you just saw that. We can change the order in which they are based on ascending and descending by simply passing a flag on a particular field of our document. Really cool option we have there. So that takes care of finding users using a callback, finding all users using a promise, and then limiting the number of records we get back in preparation for pagination, and then sorting records based on ascending or descending order using the sort. Really good options we have here for querying our database.